Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Mm.
We talk about a lot of complex topics on the show, but today we're going to be looking at something that maybe you encounter every day without even thinking about just how complex it is, and that's translation. And I'm really excited for this one because you sent over some seriously fascinating academic notes that really dive into the nuances of translation, especially between Arabic and English.
Yeah. And what we really want to do today in this deep dive is to kind of go beyond just like, oh yeah, translation is just like swapping words. Like there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah.
And we really want to like look at what it takes to make a translation good. Like what are the considerations like, making sure that it's accurate but also capturing the meaning
Yeah.
and thinking about like all the cultural like baggage and context that comes with language.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, looking at the notes that you sent over, I mean, there's a lot of really serious academic thought that's gone into this.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one of the things that really struck me is that even within kind of like the academic study of translation, there are these different ideas about what makes a good translation,
Hmm.
including some really interesting perspectives from the Arabic tradition.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it made me wonder, like, have you ever thought about, like, how much more goes into translation than just knowing two languages?
Yeah, it's a really great question to start with.
Yeah.
And looking through these sources today, I think that's what we're going to be kind of unpacking
Yeah.
is what it means to translate something and how much more goes into it than you might initially think.
Yeah. Okay. So let's kind of like start with the foundation. Like,
Okay.
what is translation? When we say that word, what do we even mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, just looking at the word itself, like translation,
Mhm.
if we look at kind of like the Arabic perspective on this, we get some interesting definitions from different scholars. So we have Al-Bustani, who basically defines tarjama as like explaining speech in another language.
Okay.
So like that's kind of interesting, right?
Right.
Like it's not just about like saying the same thing.
Right.
It's about like explaining it.
Okay.
Then we have Al-Basha, who defines it as like transferring speech into another language.
Okay.
And then we have this guy, Rita, who kind of goes into some interesting details. He says tarjama kalima specifically means explained it.
Okay.
And a terjman is the person who transfers speech from one language into another.
Mm.
And he also points out that awala in Arabic just means to explain.
Okay. So it's interesting how even within just, the Arabic tradition, there are these different like shades of meaning around this word.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
it's not just like, one monolithic idea.
Right. Yeah.
But I think when we kind of zoom out, we look at like, a more general understanding of what translation is. I think what really comes through in the material is that translation is fundamentally a communicative act.
Okay.
It's about building a bridge between languages,
Mhm.
but also between cultures,
Yeah.
right? And really kind of like the core task of translation is imparting the sense of a text. So you have a source language, we'll call it SL for
Oh,
short.
right. That's L. Got it.
And then you have your target language, which we'll call TL.
Okay.
So you're basically taking a text from the SL and you're moving it into the TL.
Got it. Okay. SL and TL. Makes sense. So if we had to just kind of boil it down, like, what is translation?
Yeah. So like kind of a general definition would be like
Mm-hmm.
transferring, reproducing, replacing, or even like interpreting the source text, which we'll call ST,
Yeah.
its message, the material, the actual text itself, or the meaning into another language.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really important here is that generally meaning is going to be prioritized over style.
Okay. So you're trying to get, like, the essence of what's being said?
Yes.
Even if you can't use the exact same words, you're trying to convey that spirit.
Yeah, you're trying to capture the spirit, not just the words.
Okay. Now, I know one of the things that the notes also go into, and I think this is really important, is that there are these fundamental differences not only between languages, but specifically between English and Arabic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And these aren't just like, kind of stylistic differences.
Right.
We're talking about like differences in how the languages work.
Yeah.
How they're structured, how they reflect the cultures of the people who speak them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, the notes give a couple of really good examples of this. So one example is linguistically, like grammatically.
Mhm.
Like if you have the Arabic phrase, siyashana.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to just kind of like, translate that word for word, it might not come out in English as she was saddened by his departure
Right.
because the grammar is different.
Yeah.
Like the subject, the verb, where they are in the sentence is different.
It's not just like a Lego brick swap.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can't just plug and play.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's the example that I think really gets to the heart of the cultural difference as well, which is
Yeah.
不塞是还塞所say, which is zakat is a pillar of Islam. Now, you could translate each of those words into English,
Right.
but you're not going to necessarily get the full cultural, religious significance of zakat.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's not just charity.
Right.
Mm.
It has a very specific meaning.
Yeah, it has a very specific meaning.
Within Islam.
Within Islam.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, oh, give some money to the poor.
Right.
It's like, it's a whole thing.
It's like a fundamental duty.
Yeah.
That has very specific rules.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, it's a really powerful reminder that language isn't just like this neutral tool. It's like it carries with it.
It's very much embedded
Yeah.
in culture.
Like the worldview and the values.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Of the people who speak it.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I found really interesting in the notes was this idea of strategic decisions
Yeah.
that translators make. So what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so this is like kind of like the high-level thinking that a translator needs to do before they even start looking at individual words.
Okay.
So they're not just like jumping into the weeds.
Right.
They're kind of like taking a bird's eye view of the task and thinking about like what are the big picture things that they need to consider.
Okay. So what are some of those questions that they're asking themselves?
Yeah, so some of the big questions would be like, what is the message of the text? Like, what is it trying to say?
Okay.
What are the salient linguistic features? So is it formal? Is it informal? Does it use technical language?
Okay.
Is it poetic? Is it using a lot of imagery? And then what are the effects of the source text? Like, what is it trying to do to the reader?
Okay.
Is it trying to inform them? Is it trying to persuade them?
Entertain them. Move them emotionally. What kind of text is it?
Okay.
Right. Is it like a legal document? Is it, a marketing brochure? Is it a scientific paper? Is it a novel? And then who is the audience for this text?
Right.
Like, who is it written for?
Yeah, because you would translate
Absolutely.
like a legal contract
You would have a very different approach.
very differently from like a children's story.
Yeah, absolutely. And then after all that, they've got to think about the new audience, right? So what are the functions and the intended audience of your translation?
Right.
Right. What is the purpose of this translation?
Yeah.
And who is it being translated for? What are the implications of all these factors that we just talked about?
Right.
And finally, what priorities should be set when choices are necessary?
Oh, interesting.
Because translation is all about making choices.
Right, because you're not always going to be able to do everything.
Exactly.
So you have to decide.
You've got to decide what's most important. So, for example, is it more important to be accurate in terms of the information?
Yeah.
Or is it more important to maintain like the stylistic flair of the original?
Okay.
Or, is it more important to make sure that the translation has the same impact on the new audience as the original did on the original audience?
Okay.
So, these are all like strategic decisions that translators have to make.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's almost like, being bilingual is like the bare minimum.
Right.
Like you have to be almost like a strategic communicator.
Yeah, you have to be a good communicator. You have to understand culture.
Yeah.
You have to be able to think about all these things.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about some of the different types of translation that the notes talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first one is like literal translation or word-for-word translation.
Yeah. So this is an approach where you try to stay as close as possible to the source language's word order. And you basically translate each word with its most common meaning, even if it doesn't really make sense in context.
Right.
So it's almost like, if you were trying to follow a recipe and you just looked at the list of ingredients.
Yeah.
But you didn't read the instructions, Like you're just kind of like throwing things together and hoping for the best.
Yes.
and the notes give some pretty hilarious examples of where this could go wrong.
Yeah.
Especially with idioms.
Yeah.
So for example, right?
Yeah.
The English idiom, rain cats and dogs.
Yeah.
If you try to translate that literally into Arabic, you get, El Isakud.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, doesn't mean anything in Arabic.
Right.
Like it's just nonsensical.
Yeah,
like the words are there, but the meaning is completely lost.
Yeah.
Another example is look after. So if you translate that literally into Arabic, you get yinya.
Yeah.
Which just means like after he looks.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have that sense of care and responsibility that look after has.
Yeah.
And then there's poke your nose into something,
Okay.
which literally translates to nijizo, which is like plant your nose in something,
Yeah.
which, again, doesn't make any sense in Arabic.
Right.
And then even like a seemingly straightforward phrase like deliver a speech.
Right.
If you translate that literally, you get nijo,
Yeah.
which is like he hands over speech.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have that sense of performance
Right.
that deliver a speech has.
Yeah. 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 So it's almost like with the literal translation, you're kind of like trying to do like build with individual bricks without considering the structure you're trying to build.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not thinking about the big picture.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that brings us to idiomatic translation.
Which it sounds like it's kind of like the opposite.
Yeah, so idiomatic translation is all about reproducing the message of the original text. But it gives the translator a lot more freedom to use, like natural-sounding colloquialisms and idioms in the target language,
Okay.
even if those specific phrases don't exist in the original.
Okay.
So it's about capturing the spirit of what's being said.
Okay. So you're not necessarily worried about the exact words.
Yeah.
You're worried about the meaning.
Exactly. You're worried about the meaning and the impact.
Okay. So do the notes give us some examples of idiomatic translation?
Yeah. So for example, right, the English phrase, he did not get a thing.
Okay.
In Arabic, you could translate that idiomatically as ee or seosing,
Okay.
both of which basically mean like he got absolutely nothing.
Okay.
But, they're not literal translations.
Right.
Another example is cool down,
Okay.
which in Arabic could be jushde, which literally means like calm your spirit.
Yeah.
But it basically means the same thing as cool down.
Right.
And a more complex example,
Okay.
his departure saddened her deeply.
Okay.
That could be translated idiomatically into Arabic as al-kashahiyya, which
Wait,
basically means like her heart was broken by his departure.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, it's a much more kind of like evocative and idiomatic way of saying it.
Yeah, it's like it really gets to the heart of like the feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
And then one more that I think is really interesting. I loved her and accepted everything about her.
Mm-hmm.
Could be translated idiomatically as sia, which is like a very culturally rich expression in Arabic.
Yeah.
That basically means like, I love her, flaws and all. So it's like, it's not just about like, accepting her. It's
Right.
like, it's a whole thing.
Yeah, it has like all these cultural connotations.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting because the Arabic translations,
Mm-hmm.
they're really focused on like conveying the same feeling or the same like understanding,
Yeah,
even if the words are totally different.
absolutely.
Which, kind of brings us to our next type of translation, which is communicative translation.
Yeah.
So how does that differ from idiomatic translation?
Yeah. So communicative translation is all about making sure that the target audience understands the message
Okay.
as clearly as possible.
Okay.
And the way it does that is it tries to render the exact contextual meaning in a way that feels natural and readable in the target language.
Okay.
So it's not so much worried about like, being super accurate to the source text.
Right.
It's more worried about making sure that the message comes across clearly
Okay.
and effectively.
So you're kind of like prioritizing clarity and impact.
Yeah, exactly. You're
Yep.
prioritizing clarity, impact, and readability.
Okay.
And the goal is to create the same effect on the target reader as the source text had on the original reader.
Got it. Okay. So that kind of brings us to our next type of translation, which is semantic translation.
Yeah.
So how is that different?
Yeah, so semantic translation, according to Newmark, aims to render the exact contextual meaning of the original
Mm-hmm.
as closely as the semantic and syntactic structures of the target language allow.
Right.
So basically, you're trying to be as accurate as possible while still making sense in the target language.
Okay.
And it tries to, like, replicate the original text's forms and nuances.
Okay.
It tries to reproduce the original context as much as possible. And it even tries to retain elements of the source language's culture
Okay.
in the translation.
So you're not just trying to get the meaning across, you're trying to like preserve as much as possible
Exactly.
of the original text.
Of the original text.
Okay. So whereas communicative translation is like focused on the reader,
Yeah.
semantic translation is kind of like focused on the original.
It's trying to be as faithful as possible
Okay.
to the original.
Got it. Okay. So one thing that the notes mentioned that I thought was kind of interesting was translation by addition.
Yeah.
What is that?
So translation by addition is basically when you add elements to the target text that weren't explicitly stated in the source text. And the notes point out that this happens a lot when you're translating from Arabic into English.
Okay. So why would you do that?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons.
Okay.
One reason is just grammatical necessity. So sometimes the grammar of the target language requires you to add words that weren't in the original.
Okay.
Another reason is cultural clarity.
Okay.
So sometimes you need to add words or phrases to make sure that the target audience understands the cultural context of the original text.
Okay. So can you give me some examples of when that might happen?
Yeah. So for example, right,
Yeah.
the Arabic phrase, it's ikinci seks, a translator might render that into English as since the days of the Turkish hegemony.
Okay.
Now you notice that the word days isn't explicitly present in the Arabic, but it's often added in English just to make the sentence flow better.
Okay. So it's not adding information that wasn't there.
Right. It's not changing the meaning.
Yeah.
It's just making it sound more natural in English.
Okay.
Another example is maternity wear,
Okay.
which can be translated into Arabic as esun silo. Now, the word esun means especially,
Okay.
and it's often added in Arabic just to make it clear that these clothes are specifically for pregnant women.
Okay.
And then one more example.
Okay.
Drinking water
Yeah.
can be translated into Arabic as sun susu sedie. Now, the suse means safe or fit,
Okay.
and it's often added in Arabic just to clarify that this is water that's safe to drink.
Okay. So it's almost like you're not adding information so much as you're adding clarity.
Yeah, exactly. You're adding clarity or you're making the sentence sound more natural.
Got it. So one thing that the notes mention that I think is really important is this idea of equivalence.
Yeah.
And this sounds like something that's really central to the whole idea of translation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you explain what equivalence is?
Yeah, so equivalence is basically the idea that you're not always going to be able to translate something word for word
Okay.
and still convey the same meaning.
Okay.
So sometimes you have to use different stylistic or structural memes in the target language to convey the same message as the source language.
Mhm.
And this is especially true when you're dealing with things like idioms, proverbs, or cultural references.
Okay. So it's you're not just looking for the same words. You're looking
Yeah.
for something that has the same effect
Exactly.
on the reader.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the notes break this down into different types of equivalence.
Yeah.
So what are those?
Yeah, so we have, first of all, linguistic equivalence, which is basically just similarity on the word level.
Okay.
So if you have two words in different languages that mean basically the same thing, that's linguistic equivalence. Then you have paradigmatic equivalence, which is equivalence on the grammatical level.
Okay.
So if you have two grammatical structures in different languages that function in the same way,
Oh,
that's paradigmatic equivalence. Then you have stylistic equivalence, which is also sometimes called translational equivalence. And that's basically just functional equivalence.
okay.
So you're trying to achieve the same meaning and impact in the target language,
Okay.
even if the stylistic choices are different.
Okay.
And then finally, you have textual equivalence, which is also sometimes called syntagmatic equivalence. And that's basically just equivalence of form and shape.
Okay.
So if you have two texts in different languages that have the same structure,
Okay,
the
yeah.
same flow, the same rhythm,
Okay.
that's textual equivalence.
Okay. So it's not just about finding the right word.
Right.
It's about making sure that,
It's about the whole package.
yeah, the whole package works,
Yeah.
the grammar works, the style works, the effect on the reader is the same. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So another strategy that the notes talk about that I thought was interesting was borrowing.
Yeah.
And this is something that we see happening in languages all the time.
Yeah, all the time.
So can you explain what borrowing is?
Yeah, so borrowing is basically when you take a word from the source language
Mm.
and you just use it directly in the target text.
Okay.
So you don't even try to translate it.
Okay.
And there's a couple of reasons why you might do this.
Okay.
One reason is that there might not be a good equivalent in the target language.
Okay.
So, for example, there's no real Arabic equivalent for the word internet,
Okay.
so you just borrow the English word.
Okay.
Another reason is that you might want to preserve, the specific connotations of the source language word.
Okay.
So, for example, the English word coup d'etat,
Okay.
it has very specific connotations
Right.
that you
Yeah.
might not be able to capture if you tried to translate it.
Yeah, yeah.
So you just borrow the French phrase. And then the final reason is that you might just want to add a little bit of, cultural flavor to the target text.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're translating a novel from Arabic into English,
Okay.
and the novel talks about traditional Arabic food,
Okay.
you might decide to just leave the Arabic names for the dishes in the English translation,
Okay.
just to give the reader like a taste of Arabic culture.
Right. Okay, so I mean, English has lots of words that are borrowed from other languages.
Yeah, absolutely. Tons.
Right.
Like menu,
Yeah.
coup d'etat, cafe, alcohol,
Yeah.
chic, Islam.
Right. And Arabic has lots of words that are borrowed from English.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Like, supermarket.
Yeah, unch oksh
Yeah,
internet.
Right. Like, it's kind of cool to
Yeah.
see how languages, like, interact,
Yeah.
influence each other.
It just shows how languages are constantly evolving and changing and borrowing from each other.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a reminder that, like, language isn't, like, this isolated thing.
Yeah,
It's
I'd
like,
say,
it's
yeah.
always in contact.
It's always interacting with other languages.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the last things that I wanted to talk about, because I thought these were really interesting, are these concepts of domestication and foreignization.
Yeah.
And this comes from this translation scholar, Lawrence Venuti.
No.
So can you explain these two concepts?
Yeah, so domestication is basically when you try to make the translated text read as smoothly and naturally as possible in the target language.
Okay.
So you're trying to make it sound like it was originally written in the target language.
Okay.
And you're not so worried about preserving like the unique cultural or linguistic features of the source text.
Okay. So you're kind of like making it feel familiar to the reader.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if it means like losing some of the original flavor.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what about foreignization?
Yeah, so foreignization is basically the opposite. It's when you try to preserve as much as possible of the source text's unique cultural and linguistic features in the target language.
Okay.
So you might keep culturally specific terms even if the target audience is not familiar with them.
Okay.
You might try to mirror the source language's sentence structure.
Okay.
And you might generally try to make the reader aware that they are reading a translated text.
Okay. So you're kind of like highlighting the foreignness of the original.
Yes, exactly. You're not trying to hide it.
Right.
You're trying to embrace it.
So, I mean, it seems like a really fundamental question for a translator to ask. Like,
Yeah,
do I want to make this feel familiar or do I want to keep it?
exactly. What's my goal here?
Yeah.
What am I trying to achieve?
Right. Because if you want to like really expose the target audience to another culture,
Yeah,
maybe foreignization makes sense.
exactly.
But if you just want them to understand the information,
Yeah,
maybe domestication makes more sense.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Now, I know that the notes include a quote from this really famous translator, Gregory Rabassa.
Yeah, he's great.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah. So Rabassa said, a translation can never equal the original. It can approach it. And its quality can only be judged as to accuracy by how close it gets.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's like a very humble understanding of what translation is. Like,
Yep.
you can never fully capture the original.
Exactly. You can never fully capture, you can only get close.
Yeah, yeah,
And the closer you get, the better the translation is.
yeah. That's great. And then we also have a perspective from the Arabic intellectual tradition.
Yes.
And this is attributed to Al-Jahiz in his Kitab al-Hayawan.
Yes.
And I'm just going to read the quote in Arabic first.
Okay.
So I can read the quote in Arabic first.
Okay.
Selen Shini Wanashe Hayam Skon Cherokee, Hype Clonshe through Old Field. That's continent. That's where I could go. It's booking are long to go over. Shini Onyu said, Selen. Wow.
So basically, the idea here is that a translator needs to have equivalent knowledge and eloquence in both the source and the target languages.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not enough to just like know a lot of words
Right.
in both languages.
You have to be able to use them effectively.
Yeah, you have to be able to like write beautifully,
Yeah.
speak,